everyone, my name is Shauna in case you don't know, and welcome back to another video. In today's video I'm going to be doing my June reading wrap up. I read a lot of books this month and I am very proud to say that every single book that I read this month had at least one LGBTQ+ character in the book. I wanted to make sure that I was reading a lot of LGBTQ+ books for Pride Month, and there's some other books I read that aren't like explicitly labeled as LGBTQ+, but I made sure that they had at least one character that's a part of the community. So without further ado, let's crack into this video. The first book I read this month was called Haru to Aiden, and this is by Alexia Prax. This one was free on the iBook store, which is why I read it, but I was like really disappointed by it. Haru to Aiden is about two stepbrothers who fall in love and have a very adult relationship. This story is also written by a female, and I feel like that's a really important part to mention about this story. And the reason why is because, well, I'm trying to keep this age appropriate, so I'm trying to figure out how to word this in an appropriate way. I think the way I can word this to make this sound the most appropriate is sometimes when you read male loves male stories that are written by female authors, you can tell that they have a joy and satisfaction in these type of relationships, and it like borders on creepy and gross. And that is what this book felt like. It felt like this author has this just joy and obsession with male loves male stories and with incest stories, and I was like, no, you shouldn't have even written this story at all, and it wasn't even well written. So I gave this one star. This book was just like so disgusting and I'm so upset by it. I have a full review up on Goodreads and I will try to link that down in the description below. The reason why I'm going to link that down in the description below is because in order to capture my full thoughts on this book, you have to read my review with adult content and adult words in it, okay? Because this book was just a disaster. So yeah, 1 star. Next up, I read Attack on Titan Volume 25. I gave this one 3 stars. This is part of the Marley arc. I'm not a huge fan of the Marley arc. I've just been waiting and waiting and waiting for everyone out of the Survey Corps to come back, so this was a 3-star read for me. I can't summarize what each book in the Attack on Titan series is because it would give massive spoilers, but the original plot to this series was that there are people who are being kept behind these walls to protect themselves from titans that are outside that eat humans. So it's a dystopian science fiction futuristic story. And Attack on Titan has 3 LGBTQ+ characters. So Historia is lesbian, Ymir is lesbian, and the third one is Hanj. I may be saying their name wrong. Hanj isn't explicitly LGBTQ+, but the author said that when you refer to Hanj, you either need to use gender-neutral pronouns or use both masculine and feminine pronouns equally. So I take that to mean that Hanj is non-binary or gender fluid. The next book that I read was For the Love of Scott. This was by Jen Fitzgerald. This one helped me finish my goal of reading 5 iBooks, because that was one of the goals I set myself for this year, to read 5 iBooks, because I download so many free ones and I need to read them, and I need to stop like just downloading them on my phone and not reading them. For the Love of Scott is about 2 men who fall in love, and one of them was in the army and they lost their leg in the army, and so he has some sort of like self-esteem issues because of that. I don't know if that's the right word for it. Like, he's struggling with feeling like he's not as normal as everyone else, but he finds the perfect guy who just isn't fazed by the fact that he is an amputee. This book sounds really good in concept, but I couldn't get connected to any of the characters. I felt like the adult scenes were very, very awkward, and I just wasn't a huge fan of this story, so I gave it 1 star. Next up, I read a book that I was really looking forward to, but that it really disappointed me, and that was The Princess and the Fangirl by Ashley Poston. There is LGBTQ+ representation in here. Specifically, there is lesbian representation. I don't know if you can hear that, but my cat is scratching my window to the side of me. Cat. She's weird. Anyways, so I read The Princess and the Fangirl. I have a copy of the book with a signed book plate. I've been considering like figuring out how to give this to somebody who can actually appreciate it more than me, but like I'm too attached to books to get rid of them. But anyways, The Princess and the Fangirl is a Princess and the Pauper retelling. Princess and Pauper, I forget what it's actually called. This book is about Imogen? I don't know how to say her name, but she's a fangirl for this movie series that is basically the equivalent of like Star Trek. So it's like super big, super popular, and she is at the Comic-Con. She's trying to get her favorite character, Princess Amara, from being killed off. However, the actress of Princess Mara is named Jessica, and she wants nothing more than to leave this movie series behind. They are look-alike, so they are forced to step into each other's shoes when disaster strikes, and they both decide to team up to work together to solve an issue that is happening with Jessica. So, I actually really didn't like this one. I gave it 2 stars. This book was worse than the first book, and I wasn't a huge fan of the first book, so like I'm definitely not going to be continuing with this series. I really hated both of the main characters, especially Jessica. Both the main characters were bratty and they felt like really entitled, and this book takes place at a Comic-Con, but it highlights the fans that I hate that I would try to avoid if I were at a Comic-Con. So it didn't capture why I love Comic-Cons, it didn't capture the beauty of fandoms and cosplaying and those type of stuff, so I was really disappointed in this book. I know a lot of people like this book though, but honestly, like, I can't look past the fact that both the main characters were completely annoying to me, so I gave this book 2 stars. Next up, I read Attack on Titan Volume 26. The Survey Corps comes back in here and it starts to get more involved, so I gave this one 4 stars. There is still a bunch of like Marley arc stuff in here that I was like a little frustrated with. One of my favorite characters dies in here. This series is known for killing off all of my favorite characters, and I feel like my next favorite characters are going to be killed off soon. And I know for a fact at least one of them will be killed off because I saw spoilers. So this was a 4-star read because I enjoyed it more than the other books in the Marley arc, but it still feels like there was a little bit of room for improvement, but it's still really, really enjoyable. And then I listened to an audiobook, and the audiobook that I listened to was Redwood and Ponytail by K.A. Holt. Redwood and Ponytail is a middle grade sapphic romance. It's written in verse, and it is about a cheerleader and a volleyball player who slowly start falling in love. It's about them figuring out their identities, figuring out how they fit into the world. It is a cute story, but I felt like it lacked depth, and it felt like listening to it as an audiobook was not the best choice, but I did listen to it as an audiobook because Tessa Netting was one of the narrators, and she's one of my favorite YouTubers, so I enjoyed getting to hear Tessa's voice, but I felt like this one was a little lacking, so I gave this one 3 stars. I do recommend this one, but I recommend that you read it as a physical copy or an ebook as opposed to an audiobook, because I feel like this would have been a 4-star read for me if I had read it as a physical book. Next up is Attack on Titan Volume 27. I really enjoyed this one. I gave it 5 stars. One of my favorite ones in the series so far. This one was so good, so action-packed. I loved this one so much. And then I read The Kindred by Alekia Dow. This was one of my most anticipated releases for this year. This is a sci-fi story that takes place mostly on Earth, but it does involve stuff in space. It is about this like world or like system where there's this kindred system, and this is their like universe's idea of sort of like how to stop like revolution happening, like the poor people revolting against the people higher up in power. So people are paired from birth with someone from a different social class. However, these 2 main characters got paired up when they shouldn't have been because there's too much of a drastic difference between their 2 social classes, because he is a prince and she is a commoner who is struggling money-wise. Once the royal family gets assassinated though, Felix right here has to take Joy and they flee to Earth to escape and get away from the people who killed his family. This book was enjoyable, but it was really disappointing. Alekia Dow's previous book, The Sound of Stars, was one of my favorite books of all time, and it really meant a lot to me, so I had a lot of high hopes for this book, but this book just really fell flat. I just felt like I couldn't get as invested in the characters. I wasn't as invested in the plotline. I felt like there's a lot of things that were touched on that should have been dived into deeper, and I just felt the story was overall very like surface level and not as great as The Sound of Stars, so this one was a 3-star read. There is demisexual and pansexual / bisexual rep in here, and there's gay rep, and there's just tons of rep in here. It's a interesting story. I mostly enjoyed it, but it was very lackluster compared to The Sound of Stars. Next up, I read Attack on Titan Volume 28. I enjoyed this one. I gave it 4 stars. I love the action here, but like it seems like there's characters that used to be good that want genocide now. It's weird. It is very strange. I don't know how to like talk about that more without giving spoilers, but like what the frick is going on in this series? Next up, I read Heartstopper Volume 3 by Alice Osman. This was, of course, fantastic. I loved the previous 2 Heartstopper graphic novels. This one is so fantastic. The Heartstopper series is about 2 friends who fall in love and discover their identities, and it's just so awesome. If you haven't read it already, I highly recommend reading it. I don't know anyone who doesn't like the Heartstopper series. It is just that good. And next up was my first reread of the year, and that was Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, covering up the TERF's name, especially since this is a Pride Month reading wrap-up. Like, I'm not gonna give any acknowledgement to the jerk who wrote this book. I of course enjoyed this. I gave it 5 stars. There is a gay character in here, Dumbledore. But yeah, I felt weird reading this one this month because it's Pride Month and the author is a big TERF, but I was like, there's a gay character in here, and plus I enjoy this book, so I want to read a book that I enjoy. So I was just like, okay, screw it. I know that I probably shouldn't be reading this during Pride Month, but I'm gonna do it anyways. In case you haven't heard me talk about it so far, I am flagging different mentions of side characters while I'm rereading the series this year. So in this book, one of the characters that I want to flag isn't in here yet, and that character won't be introduced until the 4th book, but I flagged Percy Weasley, Lavender Brown, Lee Jordan, and Susan Bonds in this book. Yes, all 4 of those characters are in here. Percy is the one with the most mentions, and Lee Jordan is the one with the second amount of most mentions out of the characters that I was marking. And then I read Attack on Titan volume 29. This was another 4-star read. I really enjoyed this one. I love Attack on Titan so much, and I highly recommend picking up the series if you haven't already. And then the final book that I read this month, I read on Kindle Unlimited. My first book that I read on Kindle Unlimited, and it was a complete success. This book was called Catch and Cradle. This is by Katia Rose, and this was a 5-star read. It is now my favorite sapphic romance of all time. It's so good. It's new adult, so there is some very like steamy scenes, but a lot of it does feel like young adult, and I think that that is a good combination for me because I love the young adult writing style, but like I'm ready for like more mature adult characters. So I think it's time for me to give new adult more of a chance, and this was the first new adult book that I actually really enjoyed. Catch and Cradle is about 2 teammates on the lacrosse team, and they start falling in love, but their team has sort of a not official but definitely like very much enforced rule to not date teammates. So their romance is forbidden, but that rule can't stop their love for each other. It is so good. There is non-binary representation, lesbian representation, bisexual representation, and there's also dyslexia representation, and the dyslexia representation was done really well. So that was all for this video. I hope all of you enjoyed it. If you did, feel free to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to me if you haven't already. I upload videos twice a week, so my next video will be uploaded this Friday. I hope everyone's Pride Month was fantastic. I hope you got to read some awesome LGBTQ+ books in June, and I can't wait to read more books in July. Until next time, goodbye!